What stranger will you never forget?
The lady who told me I looked great in blue, and that it was clearly my color. To this day, if I'm deciding between shirts to buy or wear, I'll go with blue. That compliment was about 15 years ago at least. My lost wallet was returned in the mail. The anonymous stranger sent it back at their own expense, $9.75 postage. With all the money, credit cards, driver's license, and other items intact, nothing was missing. A note enclosed read, "Please do something kind for a stranger whenever you have the opportunity." I was driving down south with my girlfriend. We have a blowout, so I put on the donut. The donut blows out while we're exiting the very next exit. So there we are, maybe 19 and at least 100 miles from anyone we know, at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. I'm thinking on what to do next, and probably looked like there was something wrong, so this older man offered to help. He drives me 20 or so minutes to a junkyard to get a cheap tire. Then he puts the tires on the rim with no more than a pry bar and some soapy water. Had a compressor on his truck, so he aired it up and I put it on. And we went on our way. When I was super overweight, I was just starting to work out somewhat regularly. Being morbidly obese at the gym is terrible. I have never felt more eyes on me before in my life. I was on a treadmill, grinding out some inclined walk/light jogging, and a super fit girl got on the machine next to me. This was all pre-COVID. She did a short warm-up, and before she got off the treadmill she turned to me and gave me a high five and told me to keep it up. It was so encouraging to have that support, when I was used to getting stared at by everyone else in the gym. Her small, kind gesture went a long way. I volunteer at a suicide hotline. Some guy, Bob, called in and we started talking about his home situation. Nothing absolutely horrendous, but he felt trapped and stressed and felt like he didn't have options. When people use language like that, our training says we should ask if they are thinking of suicide. Many volunteers have trouble with this, but if you mention suicide to someone who is not suicidal, it doesn't make them more suicidal, they just correct you and say no. I feel more like XYZ. So I asked Bob, "You're using a lot of language that people use when they're thinking of suicide. Are you thinking of suicide?" There was a pause, and then a huge wail. I could hear so much pain in his voice. I listened to him cry for at least 5 minutes. I've talked to people who had suicidal ideation before. It would be better if I were dead kind of thinking, but with no plan. Bob said yes, he was considering suicide, and we talked it out a bit more. After the pause and wail, that was the most concerned I've ever been for a human being outside my family. This wasn't just talking. I felt like he had already made up his mind about it, which was so scary. I only know what he told me. I know he was in his car, parked somewhere. I know we got a few short laughs out of each other and we made some plans for him. Plans are important because it gives you a sense that if he has something to do, to plan for, he can't commit suicide. Anyway, he truly is a stranger. I don't know his real name or what he looks like. I just know his story, and I know that he was in immense pain that day. He had a particular kind of accent, and whenever I meet someone with that same accent, I think of him and hope he's okay. When I was a broke-as-sin 18-year-old trying to make ends meet, I had a side hustle providing IT support for households, like a Geek Squad sort of thing. In practice, I would mostly set up computers for elderly people and the tech illiterate and teach them how to use them, or get them out of technical binds, usually with printers, by Googling on their behalf. This elderly Korean gentleman hired me to set up his new computer for him. I spent an hour setting it up and teaching him how to use it, and 2 more hours eating a wonderful lunch with the man and his wife. He wouldn't accept my invoice for just the first hour. Instead, he paid me 3x my hourly rate for all 3 hours, and asked me to come back to train him the next week. Over the course of about a month, I came back 4 times, worked with him, had a lovely meal, and he would tell me about his family and his kids. He was so proud of his daughter, who was about to finish her residency and become a pediatrician. By the end of the month, he was pretty comfortable on the PC, and I thanked him profusely for how kind he was and how ridiculously he'd overpaid me. He told me I reminded him of his son, who was estranged for some reason I didn't press, and that he hoped somewhere out there somebody was being kind to his son and sharing a home-cooked meal with him. I don't know why, but more than 10 years later I can't think of that guy without tearing up. I hope everything turned out well for him. My son was a week old and had to go to the doctor. I had severe early onset postpartum depression, and I hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since his birth. I locked my keys, phone, and son in the car. This incredibly wonderful older couple calmed me down, called CAA, parked beside my car and sat with me until the tow truck came and unlocked the car. The tow driver refused payment. I will never forget those 3 people. I was waiting for my appointment with an optometrist when an old Haitian man walked in with a grocery bags. Receptionist knew him, so he walked up to me and proceeded to ask me riddles. When I finally got the answer to one, he reached into his bag and gave me a Snickers, then left. To this day, I'm really curious as to what would motivate a man to become a wholesome Riddler. I was drunk on my front porch one night. Me and a couple of friends were shooting the shit. I lived in a rough neighborhood at the time. Lot of homeless people, but most of them were decent people just down on their luck. Anyway, I see a homeless guy walking by my house and I holler out to him, "Yo man, you want a beer?" And he's like, "Man, hell yeah, thank you." So he comes up into the yard. I give him a beer and an extra one for the road. He starts going on about how he misses his son and how he never gets to see him anymore. We all sit and listen to him. He starts crying and says he bought his kid a bag of brand new Hanes socks and his mom wouldn't let him have them. Now I don't know what he did to deserve such treatment. Maybe he's a total son of a bitch and deserves to be where he is, maybe not, I have no idea. But what I do know is, whatever his past, he was having a very human moment at the time and he was super thankful, not just for the beer, but that me and my friends were listening and talking with him, just letting him vent. Then he tries to give me the pack of socks he bought for his kid, which I vehemently refused. I was like, "Man, you keep them, your feet might get cold out there." But he wasn't hearing it. I mean, he refused to keep them. He flat out insisted that I take them. Eventually it became obvious he wasn't gonna take no for an answer and he wore me down and I accepted them. I guess he didn't need the reminder. He moved on and the party vibe was completely gone. We all just went inside and crashed. About a year ago, I fell off the wagon and was back to drinking heavily every night. In about July, some random dude from the apartment complex was walking by. Said he was homeless but crashing on his buddy's couch for the weekend. I offered him some beer and smokes to keep me company. It was late night outside and I was spooked. He told me about his current life issues and how alone and unsupported he felt. We talked for hours. In November I happen upon him again, but he's dressed much nicer and has a bounce in his step. He explains that talking to me that night really helped him get his ass into gear. He gave my drunk ass that look, said, "If I can do it, you can. You're never alone." I'm nearly 2 months sober again with zero interest in picking up a bottle. I've officially started therapy and have clear but manageable goals laid out to help me move forward. If he can do it, I can. Never forget that you're not alone. Don't forget to take the time to care for yourself. Let yourself cry. Celebrate the little wins. There's always a silver lining, no matter how small, so notice it. If Nick can do it, we can too.
Subscribe for more.